Hey there, PhD friends, and welcome to another video. I'm excited to bring you today's video. In today's video, I'm talking to Dr. Doug Priest, who has a PhD in history, and he shares how he took his skills and background in history and translated that to a career in tech consulting. All right, I think that this is going to be super exciting for anybody of any PhD background to listen to. So grab your pen, grab your paper, get a drink, get some popcorn. Okay, let's do this. So one of the things I'm always encouraging people to do is to get on LinkedIn, because it's a powerful place to build your personal brand. It's a powerful place to connect with people that will help you get the job that you want. Yes, it is true. Okay, so I have a free training. The link is going to be in the description that you can sign up for, where I give you 3 tweaks that you can make to your LinkedIn profile to help you get the ball rolling in the right direction. That sounds exciting, so you go ahead and sign up. Let's get straight into the interview. All right. Hello, Doug, and thank you for joining me on the Bold PhD series. I'm excited to have you. Tell us a little bit about your educational background.
Hi, Gertrude. Thanks so much for inviting me onto the show today. And yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit about my background. So my PhD is in history, Russian and Soviet history, in fact. But I started college as a computer science major, and I really liked coding in high school. I went to college with the intention of becoming a coder. And although I really liked doing the sort of work of coding, I didn't really enjoy the classwork. And so before long, I decided to move on to some other things. And I mention that because I think the sort of technology through line in some of my history matters a lot for where I ended up. So I ended up doing a history major and a dance minor in undergrad, a history master's, and then of course the doctorate after that. And although I didn't do the formal schooling in computer science, I did it long enough to have learned the fundamentals, and it's always been on there, the periphery for me as I've continued my sort of professional transition. And I think I've been successful in part because I've been able to combine all of those experiences and ways of looking at the world and being creative and looking at problem solving from different perspectives. So despite the fact that I ended up doing my PhD in history, all of this experience along the way, I think, has played an important role in the educational background and how I look at the work I do now.
Intriguing. So you went from a that's so intriguing to me. You went from a computer science background to history, to dance minor, to history master's, to history PhD. Very, very intriguing. Now let's talk a little bit about what you do now, because I think you hinted at it, but what do you do now?
So right now I'm working as a consultant with a company called Simplicity Consulting. My actual day-to-day work right now is full-time with Microsoft Worldwide Public Sector, and I work with Microsoft's Worldwide Director of Critical Infrastructure as a direct consultant. It's business strategy. It's a sort of direct support kind of role. And in practice, the work varies quite a bit, but I think there are 3 major elements of the work on a regular basis. So one is on the strategy and advising side. This is a little bit the hardest to define since it primarily revolves around conversations with my supervisor, sometimes presenting something on a topic we've been working on formally, but oftentimes it's also having informal conversations about a problem we're trying to solve, how we're going to approach it, and so forth. These conversations are daily, sometimes they're scheduled, sometimes they're ad hoc, and they require that I sort of stay up to date on the field that I'm working in, which is, technology and infrastructure, and be ready to have conversations around that in a variety of different contexts. The second one is project management, probably the easiest part of my job to define right now, which is managing any of several ongoing projects and programs that I'm responsible for. Those can be internal things that just have to do with the internal workings of the business, or external facing things. Sometimes these are a small week-to-week kind of project, or sometimes they're a longer-term project. And then lastly is I do a lot of work on communication. So this is where I bring in my writing skills and communication skills that I developed while I was doing my doctorate, and I bring those to bear pretty often. Sometimes it's building internal facing materials like decks or talking points or documents. And sometimes they're external things like helping prep my supervisor for public speaking or writing roles, things like that. So on any given day, I'm doing any of these things. The quantity of each one depends on what the schedule looks like for that week. And I'm in a lot of meetings. So especially because of those first two items. So in order to be an effective advisor and consultant, I need to know what's going on across the sort of whole portfolio of projects that matter in this critical infrastructure, public sector part of the business. And that means I need to attend and actively participate in a lot of those meetings on a regular basis. So from a day-to-day work, those are the areas that I'm spending a lot of my time right now.
Right. Thank you for sharing that so much with me. Now, the follow-up question I have to that, let me make sure I got you right. So you work as a consultant with an independent entity that consults with Microsoft, right?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. That's helpful. At first, it's like, do you work? No, but I think you said you work as a consultant with this entity. Okay, amazing. That's amazing. And then so you talk about your consulting, you talk about your writing, you talk about project management, and all of these things are amazing. I think these are such important skills because somebody who is in your shoes, right, who has a history background, and now you are consulting with the tech industry, the two don't seem to go together, right? So I know you said you had a computer science background, but practically, how does somebody make that leap from the kind of background that you had to where you are now? What skills were necessary? And if somebody wanted to do what you have done, what kind of advice would you give them?
Sure. There's a couple of things here. There's a couple on sort of just the skills that you need to develop, but I also think on the part of your question about the history background and the technology world kind of not being exactly in alignment is a question that I've been asked a lot. And I think one of the important things that I learned as a historian is how to think proactively and critically about how things change over time, which is something that the technology industry cares a lot about. So certainly I've had to think about new ways of applying that skill in my new role, but that kind of core background in the way of analytically approaching change is something that's still very relevant. And I've been working in and around sort of digital and technology management leadership roles for about 10 or 12 years total now. I finished my PhD in 2016. And during the time that I was working on my PhD, I was working with a not-for-profit that some of your listeners might be familiar with called HNet. And so they're an academic kind of adjacent not-for-profit that facilitates academic discussions and sharing and things like that. So I was working there as mostly in like a project management role. And that sort of gave me a nice place to jump off from when I finished my doctorate in 2016. I had some of that project management experience and was able to build on that over time. So the story really does also matter in that it isn't something where I just, snapped my fingers overnight and was able to go from doing the academic work to doing the non-academic work. I really had to build up a set of skills over time. As we talked about a little bit already, project management is one of them. So there's some mechanics here, like you need to be able to identify what steps it will take to get a project done, set timelines, and manage the other people who are involved in the project so the work actually gets done. And formal project management training is probably a plus, but I don't actually have that. And a lot of times you don't actually need it. You can learn by doing. And, if you can find other avenues to getting that sort of project management experience, what really matters is that you're able to communicate to prospective employers that you've been able to take projects from, beginning to completion.
So I have a question here. I don't mean to interrupt, but I do have a question here about this, right? Thank you for saying that you don't necessarily need a formal certification. It definitely helps, right? Because you end up having some extra training. So what would you say are some resources? I know that in our PhDs, we end up project managing a lot. We don't call it project management, but we end up doing a lot of that. And so somewhat we can fall back on that. But if somebody wanted to get some basic training on project management, are there informal tools, books, anything that you would recommend?
Sure. So I think a couple of points there. First is that, um, yeah, when it comes to the PhD background, I think the level of project management experience people will have will depend a lot on the field they're coming from. And especially, if they're coming more from like a lab or group environment where there's a little bit more of the people management side, that's really a plus in terms of being able to tell your story to employers. It's a little bit tougher, I think, on the humanities and sometimes the social sciences side when you're doing a lot of your research solo, and you may be managing yourself in the research and the writing and the whole project, but it's typically a project that you're doing by yourself, and that's much less often the case, I would say, in the sector where I work now. In terms of getting some of these skills and certifications, there's a number of different sort of online certifications that you can get. Some of the major tech companies offer them. I won't name them by name at the moment, but you can find them out there. There's also a number of these sort of online learning platforms that offer lots of different kinds of certifications, including project management ones. And if you do like just a search, you'll be able to find a number of those things. And some of them can be free or very low cost, and some of them can probably run to the thousands of dollars pretty quickly. And so, keep the budget in mind when you're thinking about which ones you want to pursue. It can be a nice way to get an additional credential on your resume and sort of help you tell that story that you're ready to do this kind of work as you're transitioning from academic work to non-academic work. But I would say that the thing that you ultimately need to be able to do is connect the dots for someone who's trying to, hire for a position, and explain why you're in a good position to be able to do that work. And so if the certification is something that you think helps tell that story and is worth the time and possibly money investment for you, then it's something you should pursue. But if you do think you have a compelling case and can show that you've done this and have some deliverables you can point to, like a project you completed or things like that, then that might be sufficient. And it's going to depend on person to person if it's worth their time.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so back to our question about skills before I interrupted, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you talked about project management. So also you mentioned consulting. I know that this is something that for a lot of STEM majors, a lot of humanity, social science majors and PhDs, they want to get into this, but it's consulting always, it seems like this enigma, this puzzle, this word that people throw around. So, in your experience, what does consulting look like? And how can people leverage the skills that maybe they've gained along the way in the educational experience to get into consulting?
Yeah. So consulting definitely means a number of different things depending on sort of who you're working for and in what sector you're working. I think, I'm working through a consulting firm. So I'm a full-time employee of Simplicity Consulting, as I mentioned before. And they work with their clients to sort of match their full-time consultants with positions that need to be filled on a contract basis. That's how that works. And to me, that model has been very helpful because it's not just me sort of out there doing sort of independent consulting work by myself, sort of freelancing. It's much more structured like a full-time position. And that is something that I had, valued. It's a little bit less flexible maybe for some than others. But to me, the structure is actually very helpful. It comes with things like benefits and, a little bit more consistency. So if you're someone who's looking for that style, then I would definitely recommend checking out Simplicity or other similar kinds of firms that hire you on and then match you with jobs. And that's a good way to, get into it. There are also a lot of consultants who, work in more of a sort of freelance form where they're finding their own clients, making their own contracts and doing all of the work like that. But in terms of the work that I do and the skills required to do it, I think there's a number of things in addition to project management. One is that you've really got to be able to communicate well in writing, uh, interpersonally, and you want to be able to not just have good ideas that you can share, right? You need to be able to communicate them effectively, explain what the value is. And I think this extends a little further, and also to say you need to be able to effectively communicate the impact that your work has had and will have. So if I'm having a conversation, I need to be able to say, here's my recommendation on this, here's why I'm recommending it, and understanding that there's going to be several other perspectives in the conversation in the room, and being able to sort of proactively make the case for your particular thing. So it's not just about sort of passively taking the work that's being assigned to you and giving it back completed, but taking a more proactive role and making recommendations about what kind of work should be done, and what that looks like. So it's really a give and take. It's not just a sort of passive give the work, complete it, and hand it back.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that insight. Thank you so much for that insight. Now, I think one of the questions that I like to ask people is, and I've just started asking it, is why you left academia. What was the driving force behind that?
Yeah, so I guess there's a lot of reasons, personal, professional. I think, at the end of the day, I had been, for several years before I left, while I was finishing up my PhD, already sort of questioning whether or not it was the profession that I wanted to spend my time in. Another way of putting that might be that although I found the work very intellectually interesting, I really loved teaching and being in the classroom. Being a professor is also its own job, right? It's not just a sort of free-floating intellectual mission. It's a job, and it has a set of responsibilities beyond just your academic research and teaching. And the further I got along in my PhD program, and the more it was sort of close to that part of it, I started questioning whether or not this was the profession that I really wanted to go in, from the standpoint of, is this kind of on a day-to-day basis the way I want to spend my time working? So I had begun questioning that. And then, of course, academia is just a really tough profession as well in terms of job opportunities. You have to be very mobile. You have to be willing to move around for postdocs and visiting assistant professorships and all of this. And maybe you get into the tenure track at some point, but it's really challenging. It's demanding. I have a family, so it wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to drag them all around, place to place, year to year. So that was a big factor for me as well. And so kind of all of these things combined to me thinking, okay, I think I'm going to start looking elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did starting in sort of the summer of 2016 after I defended my dissertation. And I think it's been a good choice. I think, sometimes people ask, did you regret your choice, or, how has it been? How has the work been? And it's been, every bit as intellectually challenging, I think, as the academic work. So I've been able to continue to exercise that muscle. And I think I've been able to have some really strong positive impact as well. So one of the reasons that I was in academia in the first place is that, I'm always seeking sort of two things: to keep learning new things and to have positive impact. Mm-hmm. And I've been able to continue doing those things. I think sometimes in academia, we underestimate the ability to do those two things outside of the academy for whatever reason. Maybe it's just cultural, maybe it's that we're just sort of so steeped in that world that we underestimate the ability to chase after those things in either the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, or in government as well, which is where I know a lot of PhDs end up working. So those things have made it a very positive experience for me. I was relatively lucky that I had some experience that I could build on that made that transition a little easier for me than maybe it would be for some other people who only had just the academic background. But those sort of professional and personal reasons, combined with a desire for a little different kind of work is what motivated me in the moment. And since then, I've had no regrets and have really enjoyed the work that I've been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you mentioned that for so many people, the thought process is I can't have a positive impact, or I can't learn as much or do innovative work outside of academia, when that is absolutely not the truth. There's a lot that can be learned, there's a lot of innovation going on. And sometimes I say, in academia, we're very academic, right? We do a lot of research, we do a lot of reading, we do a lot of writing, but the implementation ends up going actually happening in industry. So for those people that want to make that leap, actually, there is a lot to learn outside of the academy. So thank you so much,
Yes.
Doug. This was such a great conversation. Any last words?
I would just say that if you're someone who is trying to sort of chart your path, you're coming to the end of your doctoral program, or maybe you've been finished for a few years and you're thinking about alternative career options, that the main difference that I had to sort of come to terms with is when you're in academia, there tends to be at least the perception that there's a relatively straight and defined career path for you. We know it doesn't always play out that way in practice, but there's this idea that you get your degree and then you're, a sort of lower level academic and you're on the tenure track and you get tenure. And there's this sort of nice linear path that you can at least imagine. And I found that that isn't how I think about my career anymore. There's a lot of different possibilities. There are a lot of different directions I can go in. And if you had told me in 2016, when I started this journey, that I would end up where I'm sitting today, I certainly wouldn't have been able to predict it. And that's can be a little scary if you're coming from a place where you're used to thinking about your career in a very linear fashion, but it also means there's a ton of opportunities if you're thinking creatively and able to sort of chase down some different things that maybe you wouldn't have had the opportunity to before. So think about the kind of work you want to do, the sort of things you want to spend your time doing on a day-to-day basis, and then really branch out and think, what are all the different ways I could do them? Because there are more of them out there than you probably assume at first.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.